You are listening to Preconceived, where we examine the preconceptions that shape how we view the world and the paradigms by which we live our lives. Hey everybody, I'm Zale Mednick, and welcome to another episode of Preconceived. On the last episode of Preconceived earlier this week, we spoke about the past, present, and future of the British monarchy. We explored the history of the royal family, the legacy of Queen Elizabeth, and the relevance and purpose of the monarchy in present-day times. But since recording that episode, an interview was recently aired that sent shockwaves through the monarchist community, the United Kingdom, and frankly, much of the world. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, and Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, joined Oprah to share the reasons behind their decision to leave the royal family. In this interview, Meghan spoke of her inner turmoil as she grappled with the media after her marriage to Prince Harry. She spoke of suicidal thoughts during this period, and disturbingly, how she and Prince Harry were not able to get her the psychological help that they needed when they asked from the higher authorities of the palace. They also addressed how Meghan's race and questions over Archie's race influenced their decision to leave royal life, and in doing so raised many questions about where the royal family stands on issues of race and prejudice. I am joined again today by royal commentator Ed Wang. Ed, thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me again, Zale.
I felt like we did that episode about a few weeks ago, and I was planning on airing it soon. And then after this happened, I thought, well, we can't have that previous discussion and not address what has recently happened, because it's a pretty big deal. So what's been going on in the monarchist community? What kind of shockwaves has this sent? How big of a deal has this been?
I think this is a huge deal. We haven't had a significant interview like this since the Panorama interview in 1995, when the late Diana, Princess of Wales, also sent shockwaves through the royal family and to the monarchist community at large. It has been a long week of intense discussions within the royal family, and has been a week of, I think, turmoil as well within the royal household and how to deal with the bombshell of an interview last Sunday. And it's been exactly almost a week now since the Oprah interview was aired in the United States. And I watched it live when it was, not live, I watched it during the first broadcast, and it was volley after volley after volley of bombs thrown at the royal family. And you know, I was quite distressed and very, very saddened to have learned of the mental state that the Duchess of Sussex was in. To hear that she was driven to almost taking her own life or getting to that level was very sad to hear, and it showed the level of distress that she herself felt. Now, it was a 2-hour long interview, and a lot of the information that was passed by the Duke and Duchess, there were quite a number of inconsistencies based on what they have said in the past, and also within what they said in the 2-hour interview. They also made a number of statements that showed that they were not really aware of some of the rules governing the system that they lived in, such as how titles were given or how security would be funded. But I think two major issues were honed in by a lot of the audience and around the world. And that is primarily the number one issue that I mentioned of the state of the mental health of the Duchess and how she was driven to almost suicide. And number two, this allegation that a senior member of the royal family has made some comments about how dark Archie's skin tone would be, without naming exactly the member of the royal family or the context that was given in. And this has sent significant repercussions to the royal family. In particular, there are two countries in the Caribbean right now who have discussed the possibility of abolishing the monarchy and becoming a republic. Now, the Black population in these two countries are significant, and they form the majority of the population. So I think the timing of this was very bad, especially for the monarchist groups in those countries.
What were some of those inconsistencies before we get into the race issue and the issue of her mental illness that was going on in this period? What were some of the inconsistencies?
Well, you know, I think the Duchess mentioned to Oprah a few times that she did no research into the royal family. She didn't Google who her future husband would be before she went into this relationship and before she married into the royal family. And for me, it just seems here is this highly educated woman in her mid-30s at that time, graduated from a top-tier university, Northwestern, and I would think that before, and she would do research in the past about the roles that she would play on TV or in other entertainment productions, but yet, entering into this significant institution that is this Commonwealth monarchy, she didn't do any research. It just seemed a bit contrary to what her past life was like.
It
And
seemed
if you
like
look,
a lot of people, it seemed like that was surprising to a lot of people because you had
yes,
said in the previous time we chatted that you felt like Meghan didn't quite know what she was getting into. And she kind of said in that interview, quite frankly, yeah, I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
yes, but if you look at her engagement interview, when they were engaged, I think in 2018, there was or either late 2017 or early 2018, there was an engagement interview where she said, "Oh, I didn't know that much," and then Prince Harry said, "Oh, I tried to tell you as much as I can," and then she mentioned something about, "Now I understand the gravity that I'm entering into." So did she understand it or did she not understand it? And then let's go into this issue about titles. So Meghan made a statement alluding to the fact that Archie, her son, would not be given the title of Prince or Royal Highness, partially due to his skin tone or partially due to the fact that he is quarter African American. So this is very inconsistent and should have been fact checked or should have been pressed a bit more by Oprah in the interview. The title of Prince and the style of Royal Highness was set in 1917, over 100 years ago, by the Queen's grandfather, King George V, as a way to reduce the size of the royal family following complaints that the royal family was getting too big. So in those rules called the Letters Patent of 1917, all of the children of the monarch would automatically be prince and princess with the style of Royal Highness. All of the children of the sons of the monarch, so the male line grandchildren, would be prince and princess and Royal Highness. And the eldest living son of the eldest son of the Prince of Wales would also be Royal Highness. That was because King George V didn't think that there would be 4 generations of the royal family alive at the time. And there wasn't for quite some time, but the Queen has been in robust health. And she also extended the throne when she was quite young. So now we are living in a situation where there are 4 generations together. If we fast forward to 2013, the Commonwealth decided to change the rules of succession such that the eldest child, no matter the gender, whether boy or girl, would be the heir. In the past, a younger brother would come before his older sister, but that rule was changed. So then you had to look at the Letters Patent that said the eldest living son of the eldest son of the Prince of Wales would be a prince. But if the daughter was the heiress, she would just be a lady, whereas her younger brother, who was not the heir, would suddenly be prince. So the Queen corrected this anomaly by saying that all of the children of the eldest son of the Prince of Wales, so all of Prince William's children, would be automatically prince and princess and royal highness because they would eventually be children of the monarch anyways. By that token, because Archie is not a male line grandchild of the Queen, he's one level below, he's a great grandchild, he would never have been prince or princess on birth. That's the rules set in over 100 years ago in 1917. Now, he, as the eldest son of a royal duke, would be able to take his father's secondary title as a courtesy title and be known as the Earl of Dumbarton. But when he was born, Prince Harry and Meghan made it known that they didn't want him to have any titles and wanted just him to go by plain Master Archie Mountbatten Windsor without the title of Earl of Dumbarton. So the fact that he does not have a title right now was based solely on the decision of Prince Harry and Meghan, not because they didn't want to give him the title of prince. Now, when Prince Charles becomes king, then Archie at that time would be elevated one level and would then be a male line grandchild of the sovereign. And then he would be accorded the title of prince with the style of Royal Highness. But there have been some discussions and rumors that Prince Charles, over the last 30 years, have wanted to change the rules even further, such that there are not so many prince and princesses. So that's why Prince Edward's two children, even though they are the Queen's grandchildren, do not use the title of prince and princess. They're just known as lady and lord. And there was even some discussions of downgrading Prince Andrew's two daughters, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, down to ladies instead of princesses. But it was determined that because they were born with the titles in 1988 and 1990 respectively, it would be mean to take it away from them. But Archie was not born with the title. So there have been some discussions that the rules will be changed such that when Charles becomes king, Archie wouldn't be a prince. But these were discussions long before Meghan was in the picture. It's been discussed for over 30 years. So this allegation or this thought that Archie would be deprived of some sort of princely title because of his ethnic background is categorically incorrect.
It sounds like perhaps there are some inconsistencies, but that the overarching feeling amongst Meghan and Harry was that they felt kind of abandoned by the royal family and, as they called it, the firm, and that a lot of that did center on race because of that comment that was made allegedly by somebody of the royal family who was concerned about what Archie's skin color would look like. So in light of that, it sounds like that was a big reason why they did detach. Do people in the monarchist community, do they view it as a bad thing that they did this interview, that they spoke about this race issue, or is it understandable that it's a really important topic that needs to be addressed? And if it's really true that that's something that was brought up by the royal family, that's something that should be exposed because that's what prompts change.
I think there is a divide within the monarchist community right now, and I think there's a huge divide in the greater population. If you look at opinion polls issued in the last week, those in the United Kingdom typically have shown that that Harry and Meghan's popularity have gone down since the interview. Also broken down by age group and generation. Some of the younger generations would support Harry and Meghan, while people of the older generations would be quote unquote being on Team Queen or Team Royal Family. If you look at the United States, I would say that also broken down by generation. The younger generation had typically supported Harry and Meghan, but I think there was more sympathy for Harry and Meghan in the United States. Now, within the monarchist community, I would say that the majority, but not the significant majority. I would say, there's a sizable minority in this case, but the majority feels that this interview was a mistake. And the minority do feel that these are issues that are very pressing and should have been brought forward. But for me, I think Harry and Meghan knew that the royal family would not be able to respond point by point by point. So they have now given their truth out in the public sphere. And they know that the royal family would not be able to respond in kind. So a lot of these statements that are their truth would be interpreted by many people as being the truth. And we all know there's three sides to every story. There's side A side, there's side B side, and there's the truth that's somewhere in the middle.
And as you said the previous time we talked, and it's pretty clear just from watching The Crown and knowing about the royal family, they don't comment so much on things. That's kind of their MO. And one of the reasons Meghan was struggling was because she couldn't comment in defense of herself when a lot of the negative media was there. So that makes sense that they obviously knew the ramifications, and they also knew, which I hadn't thought about until you mentioned it, that the royal family has very limited means based on tradition through which they're going to respond to this in any meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. And I think, especially the comment about the member of the royal family that made the alleged racist comment, they did not name the person. They did indicate that it was not Her Majesty the Queen nor Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, but that it was a senior member of the royal family. So if you look at the senior membership, you're left with Prince Charles, his wife Camilla, Prince William, his wife Catherine, And then maybe you might include the Queen's other children, Princess Anne, Prince Edward, his wife Sophie, and Prince Andrew, who's ostracized right now. So if you look at, those are the senior memberships of the royal family. They didn't indicate who it was or the context. So by affiliation, the entire royal family has been accused of being racist. And I'm not sure if you saw, but Prince William a few days ago, after attending a royal engagement at an elementary school, was just asked point blank by a journalist, "Is your family racist?" And he, as he was walking by, replied back saying, "We are very much not a racist family." And for Prince William to give that statement, you can actually see the anger and the frustration that he is holding in, because a number of the members of the royal family has made race relations significant portions of their ethos and their program for the last, I would say, 20, 30 years. The Prince of Wales, Prince Charles specifically, has focused on promoting ethnic minorities in positions of power. In a number of his charities and organizations, he has put forth ethnic minorities and people of racialized background on his boards decades before it was, decades before the more modern notions of diversity and inclusion encouraged these actions. So, to be accused of being racist or to be seen as being racist can be quite hurtful for members of the royal family. And I am not lessening the impact of racism on people of racialized minorities, of racialized people. The Duchess obviously felt discriminated against. And I would say that there are racist members of the royal household, not in particular the royal family, but the staff, the advisors who come from a certain ethnic background, who comes from a certain socioeconomic background, being mostly aristocrats or descendants of aristocrats. I would say there are members of the royal household who are racist and who have
what's that based on?
Just social commentary, comments that they might make. People from this socioeconomic background have been quite, they keep to themselves. They don't really associate with others from different backgrounds, and these are traditionally the people who staff the royal family support, right? So I can definitely see senior members of the royal household having some subtle unconscious biases or subtle racist views that they may have had that affected their dealings with the Duchess and how to protect the Duchess and how to help the Duchess. But I would say these allegations on racism against senior members of the royal family is very serious, and I think it would have been better if there was a direct statement as to who it was and the context that it was given, so that the person can give their side of the story. And since the interview, we have seen a number of racialized members of institutions who work with the royal family come out in defense of the royal family. So the Queen has representatives in various counties in the United Kingdom who do ceremonial roles on behalf of Her Majesty and the royal family. These are called Lord Lieutenant. And even if you're a woman, you're still called a Lord Lieutenant. And I think this is a mini version of a lieutenant governor that we have in the provinces of Canada. So these Lord Lieutenants would work constantly across all royal households in arranging royal visits, coordinating administrative issues on which royal was going to visit which county and for which cause and for which engagement. And a number of Black Lord Lieutenants have come out to say, look, we have worked with the royal family for 20 years, 10 years, 15 years. I'm the first Black Lord Lieutenant of Greater London, or I'm the first female Black Lord Lieutenant of Nottingham. And we have worked with the royal family, and in our engagements with the royal family, we have never felt any inkling of racism from the senior members of the royal family. So you do see these members of racialized communities come out in support of the royal family as well in the last week.
And when these comments ultimately have pretty much led to a categorical belief amongst many people that with a broad brush, the royal family is racist, regardless of how they try to express it. So you're saying that's far too broad of a brush to be using for the royal family, but for people who don't know the full story or aren't going to hear the rebuttal from the royal family, that's kind of what we're left with.
I think so, and we also have to think about like, racism is viewed significantly differently than racism in Canada or the United States. I think because the United Kingdom did not have the level of slavery that existed in the United States and the history of the Civil War and emancipation, the United Kingdom's view of racism is a bit more in your face, in that for them, racism is if someone went to punch a Black person on the street and use the N word. For them, that is racism. I think for a significant portion of the British population, they do not understand the concept of unconscious bias that we do here in North America.
Yeah, because
So
that's a bit
there,
of a different version of racism from the one that you and I are probably, when we're talking about racism, we're
yes,
talking about a much deeper, systemic, as they say, form of racism, which is far beyond just things like acts of violence like that. We're talking about subtle discriminations and things that are very important, but not as not as perhaps obvious as those.
exactly. And so I think if you go to small village in the UK and you ask them what is systemic racism and does it exist in the United Kingdom, or what is unconscious bias, I think based on my experiences visiting the UK and talking to British people, is that they would not really understand what the concept of systemic racism is, or they would say that there is no systemic racism in the United Kingdom,
So
which,
does that suggest then, though, that there maybe is a problem? And I'm not saying that all falls on the crown, but if
mhm.
that's how the British people view racism, which is a shell of what racism really is that reflective on the leadership in England, whether it's the monarchy or whether it's the government or social leaders, that they really are behind in issues of race?
I would say that the royal family, contrary to this view that they're racist, have actually been in the forefront of trying to show racial equality within through their actions over the last 20, 30, 40 years. Now, the Queen is a huge proponent of the Commonwealth, and a large proportion of the population of the Commonwealth are Black people. And she has made the Commonwealth a focus of hers throughout her entire reign. I mentioned before, the Prince of Wales has, over the last 20, 30 years, promoted people from racialized backgrounds onto the boards and organizations that he is involved with, or the organizations where he has a direct influence in, long before, it is, I would say the common notions of diversity and inclusion has been implemented. So I think they have been in the background through their actions been promoting racial equality and fighting discrimination. And that's why, for me, having studied the royal family and having known what they have done over the past number of decades, for me, it seems, I was quite shocked by this allegation of racism.
I want to talk about the Queen a bit because in the interview, Meghan and Harry were both very complimentary of the Queen, in keeping with how we chatted with our chat in the last episode, where you talked about how the Queen has tried to learn from past mistakes, how she is progressive, and how they really only had positive things to say about the Queen and were trying to almost separate her from any critiques they were making. Now, a lot of people look at this situation, though, on the surface and are probably going to say the Queen hasn't learned anything, because even though they were exonerating the Queen is the head of the royal family. And while they're talking about the firm in this interview and they're talking about the family, how can you separate the Queen from that if she is the head of that? So how do you think this does affect the perception of Queen Elizabeth, even though they tried to separate her from that? And does that affect her legacy? Because if it does, it's almost it can be seen as unfortunate if you're saying that she really has changed a ton with the times, tried to be progressive, tried not to let what happened with Diana repeat itself. Yet, I don't know what the narrative is going to be moving forward.
Yeah, I think, that was an aspect that was quite noticed by a number of viewers, that the Duke and Duchess tried to shield the Queen, and to a lesser extent Prince Philip as well, from their statements, from all their negative experiences that they had, and saying how welcoming the Queen has been. But at the end of the day, the buck stops with the queen. She is the head of state. She is head of the institution. The royal household listens to her. She is the final decision maker. And Prince Harry in the interview made some statements saying, sometimes the queen gets bad advice, but ultimately the queen, with her experience, she should be able to tell whether that advice is good or bad. So I think the shielding of the queen from some of the negative aspects was intentional, but I don't think it had any actual effect. She is the head of the institution, so their attacks on the institution was directly an attack on the queen. I really don't know how this is going to play forward. We haven't been in this situation for quite some time. Diana's allegations in the 1995 Panorama interview was more focused on specifically how she was treated, but also on how Prince Charles would be suitable to be king. Whereas, this interview, we're left with significant issues on mental health and on racial equality, which are two issues that are at the forefront of society these days, right? So it's definitely left a huge hole in the royal family. And the royal family, I think there's going to be some internal debate right now on how they address this issue going forward. I think the queen is still of the generation where she feels that this is first and foremost a family issue. And to some extent, to a certain extent, that's true. This is a family that is international in scope. This is a family that is public in scope. But at the end of the day, this is still just a family as well. So I think that what the queen is saying, give us the time that we need and the space that we need to first heal as a family. And then we will then make the explanations to the world, whether it be direct responses, which I think is unlikely, but more through actions on how the Sussexes will be included in a number of royal family engagements coming up.
I guess I'm curious what you think. I have a feeling I know what you're gonna answer, but I'm curious what you think is the right response from the queen based on everything she's learned over her long tenure as queen. Is there an understanding that there is a tendency to be more private about things and to not respond? Is this one of those situations where the past might dictate maybe it's a good idea to give a speech and to address some of those things head on? Or is that just so out of keeping with how she views the crown that is something that doesn't mesh well with her years as a monarch?
So, I was torn myself on the palace statement that was issued on Tuesday, yes, that was issued on Tuesday. It was very short of 61 words or 60 words or something. Now, as a monarchist, as a traditionalist, as someone who has studied and admired the royal family since my childhood, I can see definitely where the queen was coming from in having a short statement so that they can deal with this as a family. But as someone who is technically a millennial and who grew up in North America, I definitely felt the urge of saying, give me more than this. I want an explanation. And so I think, depending on who you are and where you live and where you grew up, the reaction to this public statement will be very different. I think this situation is something that's significantly different than what the queen and the royal family has experienced in the past. If you look in 1997, when the Princess of Wales died, the queen and the royal family shut off. They stayed at Balmoral. They dealt with themselves as a family first, looking after Princes William and Harry. Whereas you had the population in London and the UK screaming and shouting and saying, where are you, ma'am? You're the mother of the nation. We're here grieving the death of the people's princess. And you're, hundreds of miles away at Balmoral, ensconced and separated from the world. And the queen got a lot of slack for that, and I think her popularity went down slightly during that week. And it took the prime minister at that time, Tony Blair, to advise her to show more emotion. And then the royal family came down. There was more public displays of emotion. The queen made a TV broadcast that day on their return to pay tribute to Diana. So I think a lot of people are saying, well, why can't the queen give some sort of televised statement here in response? But I think the situation is different. In that situation, the Queen's broadcast was very much going to be a statement of closure. There was no one there to make a rebuttal or to make a further response. But here we have a different situation. If the Queen,
I think many would agree.
yeah,
It's definitely different. Somebody dying and addressing a grieving nation versus addressing a controversy. And not that Princess Diana's death wasn't a controversy, but it's one of the different kinds. So I think you're right, but people would love comparisons. So it's very easy for people to say, this is Diana all over again, and forget the nuances of it.
yeah. So, I think what the royal family is trying to prevent is a back and forth of palace statement followed by another interview, followed by another palace statement, followed by another interview. The Queen has been reported to have issued a triple whip order on the royal household in saying that all senior members of the household, not the family, the household being the advisors, the staff, the private secretaries, are now prevented and are told to stay out of the situation, do not give any statements, do not interfere. The Queen would deal with the next steps herself and bring the family members to the table. So that is their next step, and that is the approach that they have decided. They are going to heal themselves as a family first, and I think afterwards they will give some sort of explanation.
I have two more questions to ask you. One is about Meghan and Harry speaking about how they sought out help and they couldn't get it. That was disturbing, and it didn't really make sense to a lot of people watching, because you're thinking, why wouldn't they get that help? What has the response been to that?
So the response has been, obviously, there's been two different responses. The one of anger, saying, here are these two young people who are clearly suffering, and why is this institution not helping them? And then you have the other people who are saying, we understand their pain, but what avenues were they going through that prevented their help? So here is my understanding based on the interview. The Duchess was in a terrible mental state. She felt suicidal. She then went to the HR department at the palace to seek help and said she needed to go away, meaning she needed to get maybe be put in some sort of home away from home to help her through the times. But that was rejected by the HR department on two folds: that one, she was not a paid member of staff, and two, that it would be very bad from an image perspective. So if that is the course that actually happened, then that member of the household, no, there's no actual HR department at the palace. There are various number of departments, but I think what she meant is she went to the Lord Chamberlain's household, or a senior member of the household who deals with some of these benefits issues. And I think, whomever that member of the household is who said no should be brought to account, because mental health is significant these days and has been a significant passion and cause of the royal family over the last 20 years. So, but Meghan, it was also a bit weird or strange that she would go seek this route, because she is not a member of the household. She's not staff. She is a principal. She is a member of the royal family. The institution do not really look after the health benefits or provide guidance on this aspect. And so for me, it was also strange that then they sort of just stopped at that instead of going to seek help themselves or seeking help from other family members, because it's been highly publicized that other members of the royal family have sought mental health assistance over the last number of years. Prince Harry himself has highly publicized the fact that he has sought therapy at the encouragement of his father, the Prince of Wales, and other mental health assistance to deal with his depression and his lingering issues dealing with the death of his mother. Princess Diana in the 1980s sought a number of psychiatrists' help to deal with her bulimia. And this has been highly reported in all of her biographies. And a lot of this help was suggested and paid for by the royal family. We have another member of the royal family that is lesser known these days, called the Duchess of Kent. She suffered a miscarriage in the 1970s, or was it the 1980s? And she needed a lot of psychiatric help as well to deal with her loss. And all of this has been highly publicized. So for me, as someone who has studied the royal family, it just seems strange that they were told not to get help, even though other more prominent members of the royal family have sought public help in the past. So I think that if maybe they were confused on who they were supposed to go to. I felt it really strange that Prince Harry mentioned that he was too embarrassed to tell even his family about the situation that Meghan was in. So if he was too embarrassed to tell Charles or Camilla or the Queen, how would they have been able to help them then? And Prince Harry is involved with the Heads Together initiative that promotes mental health for young people. He's involved in it. He knows a lot of psychiatrists. He knows a lot of people who help in this industry. Why couldn't he get the help for his wife? So for me, I am not lessening the degree of anguish and mental suffering the Duchess was in. I am not at all. As someone who works in a high stress environment and deals with mental health issues on a personal basis, I totally feel for her. But at the same time, I just felt it very strange that she went through certain channels that, to me, was obviously unavailable to her.
So you're saying it was unavailable to her. That's where I find a little bit confusing. It was unavailable to her because it sounds like the firm has a lot of, as they referred to it, it sounded like the firm has a lot of control over decisions and the royal family in general. But you're saying that in this regard specifically, the firm actually doesn't have any say in them deciding to seek out help?
Yeah, so what I'm saying is I think she went to sought guidance from the royal household, the staff, okay, the institution, and that was not the right path. What she should have done was go tell the other members of the royal family, because the royal household, when they deal with health benefits, seeking mental health support for people within the royal household, they're looking after staff. They're not looking after the royal family. The royal family deal with their personal health issues sort of themselves, right? They're not employees of the royal family. The royal household, when they deal with, they're in charge of managing the health of employees, of which Meghan is not. She's a principal. So I think what I'm saying is the person who she went to might not have been the right person, but the response that she got from that person was wrong.
Gotcha.
And that person needs to be brought to account, because that person should have escalated it further to the family. But
Exactly.
at the same time, I'm saying Harry and Meghan should have also gone to the family. And it appeared from Prince Harry that they didn't, because he was too embarrassed.
Gotcha. So on some level, it could seem to some people a little bit semantical that they went to the wrong person. But you're saying that person that they went to, even if it was the wrong person, should have escalated it. But then it's strange, and I mean, that's where we have three sides to every story like
yes.
this. Because on the one hand, why would Meghan and Harry lie about this? And if she was sick, why wouldn't they go try to get as much help as they could? And it sounded like they were trying to. On the other hand, you're saying maybe they didn't exhaust all avenues. So yeah, I mean, there are no answers to this. There are no answers to any of this. It's just, it's like you're saying, there's another side to it, which obviously the royal family cannot express, which makes.
And I am not accusing them of lying at all, right? Like, as someone who has suffered personal mental health myself, I can really feel the pain that she was in, and I can understand the pain that she was in, and I can understand how she could have felt trapped with no other avenue. And in that situation, you know what? Like, and that's what I'm very torn by this. It's very easy for people to say, well, why didn't you go a little bit further? Why didn't you go and seek help from the family? I might be contradicting myself, but, part of me that understands her, I can definitely say, look, I am in so much pain and suffering right now. I don't have the energy. I've gone to the first line of defense and try to get some help, and I got rejected. And I can understand why maybe she couldn't exhaust all avenues, because she just simply did not have the energy to. And we have to understand that when people are in such mental distress, they do not have a lot of resources, personally, energy left to deal with the situation. And that's why, I think Prince Harry, Prince Harry should have provided more help to his wife. The fact that he said that he was too embarrassed to tell the other members of the royal family of the state that his wife in, it was very upsetting for me, because he has made this cause of defending his wife his number one concern, but yet he was too embarrassed to seek help for his wife. That for me was significant.
Yeah, and Ed, to be clear, I think you've made it very clear that you are not taking a stance against the treatment of mental illness, and you're
Yeah,
not taking seriously what was said, but it doesn't mean that we can't dissect it and try to
exactly.
the situation. So I don't think you need to worry about
Yeah.
that. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave people with who are kind of leaving that interview? I know I watched the full thing and I was just in awe that this interview was happening because it was just so candid. Whether that's
Yes.
a good thing or a bad thing, there is no answer for that. But to people who are left a bit confused after watching that and not sure how to move forward, not that there's necessarily an action to take in moving forward, what would you say to them?
I would say there are a few things. One, I mentioned this before, they are an international public-facing family, but at the foremost, they are still a family. So I would say, please give them the time and space for them to come together and heal as a family first. At the same time, I would also encourage people, and that to understand that there are multiple sides and there's different contexts, and that, that they should, if they are very interested in this, they should read a bit more of the background. And I'm going to send you a link to an article on Maclean's that was an opinion piece that was written very well by a very respected royal commentator, Patricia Treble. She's Canadian and she writes things from a Canadian perspective sometimes. But this article is very good in that it challenged some of the factual issues of their allegations, such as the titles, such as security and whatnot. So I'm going to send you the link to that. So I would encourage viewers and listeners who are interested in this to read that article and then think about the interview again. I think the two major issues are the mental health allegations and the racism allegations. And those two issues, I think, will need to be addressed at some point. But some of the other aspects, I think, reading this article will help them a lot, especially when Prince Harry was making comments about being financially cut off from Prince Charles, even though, he is 36 years old and has a multi-million-dollar inheritance from his mother. The issues about titles and I would encourage listeners to read a bit more of the background first.
Yeah, and I'll post that article in the episode notes. And there's a lot we obviously didn't touch on, like the security issue, like you mentioned, and like the finances. But I think we could talk for days on this.
Yes.
Ed, thank you so much for taking the time to join me again. I'd say good timing that this happened just after I don't think there's ever good timing for this kind of thing to happen, but I'm glad we were able to chat again just because, not for, I don't view this as gossip. I just view this as a necessary chat to have after we've just had a 5-minute chat about the royal family.
No, I agree.
So thank you so much for taking this extra time to chat with me again and really appreciate having you on.
You're very welcome and thank you for having me.
And thank you everybody for listening to another episode of Preconceived. Have a great day.